Scott was so far ahead of everybody, business-wise. He knew things that me, Chris, Keith couldn't finish.
And what happened was Scott was trying to be a peacemaker between
between D-Nice and this guy, and things just got out of hand.
One day, Scott just talked to me and made me realize there's no, that's not like a long-term thing in the streets, Anything can happen.
This is the story of the man who built Boogie Down Productions from the ground up and never lived to see how far it would go. Before the gold chains, before the beefs, before rap turned into big business, there was Scott LaRock, a DJ with a degree, a heart, and a mission. He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing meaning. Scott started out working in social services, helping people who felt invisible. At night, he transformed into the backbone of one of the most important crews in hip-hop history. His beats were raw and urgent, the perfect soundtrack for a city on edge. And when Boogie Down Productions began to rise, Scott made sure it wasn't just about music, it was about truth.
One day, Scott just talked to me and made me realize there's no, that's not like a long-term thing in the streets, Anything can happen.
The way he lived and the way he died, gunned down trying to break up a fight, changed hip-hop forever and proved that this culture was always more than entertainment.
Scott was so far ahead of everybody, business-wise. He knew things that me, Chris, Keith couldn't finish.
Scott wasn't your typical DJ story. This wasn't some turntables in the basement. Next thing you know, he's famous situation. He was out here with a degree, real-life responsibilities, and the calmest energy in a city that was constantly on edge. He wasn't just spinning records. He was working a day job at a Bronx shelter, helping people get their lives together. Real ones know he had purpose behind everything he did. He grew up in the South Bronx, raised by his mom after his dad dipped early on. Even in the chaos, Scott always had this unshakable steadiness. He didn't need to be the loudest in the room, he just knew who he was. And when most people were barely making it past high school, he packed up and left the city to study up north. Basketball, books, and DJing on the side. That's where the seed was planted. By the time he came back home, Scott was leveled up, degree in hand, eyes on making a difference. His mom helped him lock in a gig at the men's shelter, and he wasn't doing it for show. He cared, like actually cared. But come nighttime, that's when he hit his other zone. Dusty speakers, dark basements, records spinning while the city pulsed. He didn't want fame, he just loved the music.
Dude, my brother who's sensational, the great MC himself, Chris.
Chris was barely scraping by. Young, frustrated, hungry, he was crashing at the shelter, and technically, Scott wasn't even supposed to get close. But there was something about him. He had this edge, this rawness that you couldn't teach. One day, Scott asked what he wanted out of life, and instead of answering, Chris just started rhyming. That moment, game changer. Scott saw it immediately. He brought Chris out to one of his sets. That one invite kicked off a partnership that would flip hip-hop on its head.
I played the 9 and you played the target. You all know my name, so I guess I'll just start it.
They linked up with Derek, who was still basically a kid at the time, and called themselves Boogie Down Productions. Nothing fancy, just 3 guys with drive. Scott was the one keeping everything running. He had the equipment, the cash, the strategy. Chris had the heat. And together, they built something that felt bigger than all of them. Something loud, raw, and real. It didn't look like success from the outside, not at first. But they weren't chasing approval. They were chasing impact. And they knew exactly where they came from and why that mattered. That's when everything blew up. The moment they dropped Criminal Minded, it was like a bomb went off, not just in music, but in people's heads. That cover alone had folks spiraling. Scott and Chris standing there holding guns. People thought they'd lost it. Critics were screaming, calling it reckless. But Scott? He knew exactly what he was doing. It wasn't some shock value stunt. It was real life, wrapped in metaphor. The whole project hit like a gut punch. Tracks like 9mm Goes Bang didn't sound like anything else out. It was raw, loud, and loud on purpose. But behind all that chaos, Scott was the one keeping it steady. He wasn't just spinning records, he was behind the samples, organizing the sessions, making sure the crew stayed focused. If Chris was the flame, Scott was the frame. What threw people off was the contrast. The music was tough, the image tougher. But Scott, he was the guy talking people out of fights. He was literally helping people get off the streets by day and then helping them tell their story through music at night. It didn't make sense on paper, but that's what made it make sense. Chris explained it later, how the songs weren't trying to sell the street life. They were trying to show it. Like, here's what it actually looks like. Not dressed up, not filtered, just facts. The guns on the cover weren't an ad. They were a warning. For a lot of kids, that danger was already part of the background. No choice, just reality. Scott kept everything sharp. He wasn't chasing attention. He wanted something real. Between the studio and the shelter, he made sure the mission never got lost. He was that rare mix of heart and hustle. Quiet, but unshakable. Always giving, even when it barely came back.
I had to get on camera. First with the Scott situation. That was an assassin.
Scott was 25. Brand new dad. BDP was finally catching fire. They were this close to a major label deal. A big check was already in play. Madison Square Garden was booked. Everything was lining up. And then, just like that, he was gone. Hip-hop didn't just lose a DJ. It lost someone who actually gave a damn. That night, the crew had been moving different. Criminal Minded was still making noise. They were on the edge of something big, and a new album was already coming together. Then, D-Nice called, panicked, beat up, all over a girl and some local gang beef in the Bronx. And when Scott got that call, he didn't hesitate. That was just who he was. He pulled together the crew, RoboCop, their manager Scotty, a few others, and linked up with Chris Lighty's guys for backup. They rolled out in 2 cars, not looking to fight, just to calm things down.
And what happened was Scott was trying to be a peacemaker between
Exactly, between
and
D-Nice and this guy, and, things just got out of hand.
But the streets never made space for calm.
Because for no reason, RoboCop got out of the Jeep, ran over and smacked the...
They pulled up. RoboCop got out swinging, and Scott followed, trying to cool it off. And it looked like it was working, until someone pulled a trigger. Maybe from the street, maybe even from above. No one's really sure, but one shot cut through the soft top of the Jeep and hit Scott in the neck and behind the ear. He slumped. The car sped off, swerving through the Bronx trying to reach the hospital. By the time they made it, Scott was fading fast. He was bleeding heavy, barely responsive. The doctors tried. There was a sliver of hope, but that hope didn't hold. Within hours, he was in a coma. Then, brain dead. His mom let the machines keep him going just a little longer, so everyone could say goodbye. That hospital waiting room turned into a full room of people who loved him. Friends, artists, shelter staff, people he'd helped, people he'd fed. Chris couldn't even walk in the room. He sat outside, shattered. MC Search said it felt like Scott was still trying to say something, even at the very end, like his body had given up, but his spirit wasn't ready to leave.
Feel that B-Boy Records is behind the whole thing?
Yeah. B-Boy Records was dirty. This guy was doing bootleg lick.
The next night, the crew still hit that stage at the Garden. Chris, D, Red Alert. All of them stood in silence while this massive photo of Scott dropped down from the ceiling. The crowd didn't know what to do at first. Then they clapped, loud. And when the music kicked in, it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a goodbye. A couple kids from the neighborhood got arrested for the shooting, but no one talked. No one stepped forward. Case fell apart. And just like that, it turned into another unsolved street tragedy. Some people thought it really was over a girl. Others said there was more to it, maybe something deeper. Truth is, nobody knows for sure. The press didn't get it. They wrote it off like just another rapper caught in the chaos. But this one hit different. This was the first time the culture had to stare death in the face, and it changed everything. Chris was never the same. His lyrics got sharper. His delivery hit harder. He launched a whole movement. No more just telling street stories. He started calling out why the streets were like that to begin with. Scott had plans. Real ones. He wasn't just making beats. He was thinking long-term. He saw hip-hop like a business way before everyone else caught on. Chris once said Scott would have been what Puff became, except without the dancing. Just pure strategy, full vision, and the kind of heart you couldn't fake. Over the years, hip-hop lost a lot of people, but Scott was the first. Not the first hit record, not the first award, but the first real loss that shook the whole culture. He was the one who showed up before the checks did, went to college, worked at a shelter, raised a kid, helped people. And when Criminal Minded dropped, that wasn't the end of his story. It was just the part the world noticed. What made it hurt even more? His death wasn't over fame or beef or who had the bigger song. It wasn't that kind of mess. It happened because he showed up for someone he cared about. One second he was trying to calm things down. The next, he was gone. And suddenly, hip-hop couldn't pretend anymore. This wasn't just lyrics. This was life and death. Before that, the worst you got from a rap feud was a diss track. After Scott, the game changed. It became clear real people could really die over this, and they did. One by one, names kept getting added to a list nobody wanted to exist. Pac, Biggie, Jay, Proof, Nipsey, Population Takeoff. Different cities, different sounds, but the same heartbreak. It was like no one ever got to finish what they started. Scott's death pulled the curtain back. Hip-hop wasn't just a beat and a hook. It was struggle, loyalty, trauma. It was joy and pain in the same verse. And that night in the Bronx, in that car, it became obvious. Words could save people, but they could also bury them. Still, things started to shift. Slowly, people began to speak up. Mental health wasn't some taboo thing anymore. Artists started building instead of just reacting. Chris turned his grief into action. He brought folks together and started a movement that gave rap room to breathe. Now you've got artists like Kendrick and Cole carrying the torch, not just rapping to rap, but saying something, using the mic like it actually means something. That mindset? That's Scott. He saw this whole thing differently. He treated music like a mission, not just a come-up, and that mindset planted seeds. His legacy isn't just that one album. It's every artist who cares, every DJ who brings purpose to the party, every kid who sees someone drowning and decides to reach back. Scott didn't just make noise. He laid the blueprint. He was the blueprint, and the rest of the world's still trying to catch up.